Sign it, sweetheart. Family doesn't need lawyers. That was my mother, holding out her own pen on the Sunday my father slid a deed across the lunch table, a deed that moved my parents' house into my brother's name alone. I'd been paying that mortgage for 9 years, every month since I was 24. My name is on the title. Half of it is mine, and they had scheduled a notary for 1 o'clock without telling me. My brother didn't even look up. He kept turning a house key over in his fingers, back and front, like a man who'd been holding it for a while. He's got kids, my dad said. You're alone. I said, okay. I signed my name clean and steady, right where they pointed. Then I asked the notary one small question, and the room stopped chewing. If you're still here, do me a favor and hit that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I want to know how many of you are hearing this at 2 in the morning with a family group chat you've had muted since spring. My name is Clara Palmer. I'm 33. I'm an internal auditor for a regional grocery chain, which means I spend my working life reading paperwork everybody assumes nobody will ever read. And to explain what happened at that table, I have to take you back 9 years to a hospital parking lot in the spring of 2017, and a conversation my father now tells people never happened. My dad's back went out in March of that year, 2 discs. He was a route driver for a beverage distributor, and a man who lifts kegs for a living does not come back from 2 discs. He was 54. The disability claim would take 14 months to approve, and the mortgage on the house I grew up in was $1,418 a month. I was 24. I had a starter job, a roommate, and a checking account that never went above 4 figures. I stood in that parking lot while my mother explained, very calmly, the way you'd read a weather forecast, that if somebody didn't cover the payment, they'd lose the house by Christmas. Nobody asked my brother. Trevor was 21 with a girlfriend and a windshield repair van he was still making payments on. Nobody asked him. Hold on to that. It matters later. I said I'd do it. I set the transfer up that afternoon on my phone, standing next to a shopping cart return. And here's the part my father actually got right. The only part in 9 years. 2 weeks later, he called and said, if you're going to pay for it, your name goes on it. He drove me to a real estate attorney in a strip mall next to a nail salon, and we did it properly. Tenants in common. 50% me, 50% him. My mother wasn't on the title. She never had been. My grandmother's estate put the house in my father's name in 1994, and my mother has run the moral department of that household ever since, which is a different job. She doesn't sign things. She decides what they mean. So 50-50 on paper, recorded real. And then I paid. 108 consecutive payments. $1,418 on the 30th of every month for 9 years. I never lived there. Everyone assumes I did. I lived in a 1-bedroom across town with a radiator that clanks, and I drove past the house I was paying for on my way to work. $153,144. I know it to the dollar. That's the kind of thing I know. Now, 3 things happened at that Sunday lunch that I did not understand at the time. Remember all 3 because I'm going to hand them back to you one at a time. There were moving boxes in the hallway. There was an orange plastic tag on my brother's keyring, and underneath the stack, my father slid across the table. There was 1 page that did not belong with the rest of them. Sunday, June 21st, 2026. I got there at 12:46 in the afternoon. The first thing I saw was the boxes. 4 of them stacked in the hallway between the front door and the kitchen. The good kind. The kind you buy, not the kind you get free behind a liquor store. My mother's handwriting in black marker on the side. Dining. Dining. Hall. Dining. I said, you guys redoing the floors? She said, we're decluttering, and took my jacket, and I let it go, because that's what you do. The second thing I didn't notice for 3 days. The hallway wall had a rectangle on it. A cleaner rectangle, maybe 18 by 24, where the paint hadn't faded. My parents' wedding photo had hung there since before I could walk. It was gone. The nail was still in the wall. The dining room smelled like pot roast. My mother makes pot roast for 2 occasions, Christmas and when she needs something from you. And there was a man at the table. He was sitting in my seat, which is a thing your body notices before your brain does. 60s, windbreaker, reading glasses pushed up on his head, a black zippered case in front of him, and a hardcover book beside it with a red ribbon hanging out of the pages. He stood and shook my hand and said, Roy Chessman. Nobody had told me anyone was coming. I said, "Are you a friend of my dad's?" He said, "I'm a notary." And my father, from the head of the table with a serving fork in his hand, said, "Sit down, Clara. Food's getting cold." Understand something about my father. Gordon Palmer is 63, and he has never once in my life raised his voice in a room with more than 4 people in it. He doesn't fight. He arranges. He decides what's going to happen, and then makes the room feel unreasonable for noticing. I sat. Trevor was across from me with a beer. 30 years old now, sunburned forearms. He had his keys out on the table, which is a strange thing to have out during a meal. 3 keys on the ring and a bright orange plastic tag. I ate pot roast for 11 minutes, and nobody said anything worth remembering. Then my mother took the serving dish away, which is her tell. My mother clears the table when the actual meeting starts. And my father put a stack of papers in front of me. It had a blue backer on it, that heavy blue cardstock they fold around legal documents, the kind you only ever see in movies, in law offices, and apparently in your parents' dining room on a Sunday. He said, "This is just to make things clean." And my mother slid her pen across the tablecloth. Her own pen, a cheap white one with a dental office logo on the barrel. "Sign it, sweetheart. Family doesn't need lawyers." Here's what it was. A quitclaim deed. Grantors: Gordon R. Palmer and Clara J. Palmer. Grantee: Trevor J. Palmer. 1 page, the way deeds always are. People expect a deed to look important, and instead it looks like a permit application. I read it. All of it. Because that's a compulsion I can't switch off. And my father let me. Because a man who's arranged something correctly is happy to let you read. And right there, at that table, with pot roast on my breath, I noticed one thing. It was a quitclaim, not a grant deed. A grant deed says, "I own this, I'm giving it to you, and I promise I haven't already given it to somebody else." A quitclaim says, "Whatever I've got, if I've got anything, it's yours, and I promise nothing at all." You use a quitclaim when you don't want to make any promises. I looked up and said, "Why quitclaim?" He said, "It's simpler." I said, "For who?" And my mother said, "Clara," in that voice, the one that means you are 2 seconds from ruining Sunday. Then my father said the sentence, the one I'll be hearing when I'm 80. "He's got kids, you're alone." It landed exactly the way he needed it to, because it's true. Trevor has 2 kids. Micah is 6, Ruthie is 3, and Ruthie thinks I live inside the phone. I don't have kids. I don't have a husband. I have a job and a radiator that clanks. What my father was saying in 5 words was, your life is a rough draft. His is the real one. So the money goes where the real one is. My mother, right on cue. "He's got a family to raise, honey. You've just got yourself." And Trevor, 30 years old, my little brother, the one I taught to drive in a church parking lot, said nothing at all. He turned those keys over in his fingers, front, back, like a man who'd been holding them for a while. So I signed. Clean and steady, and my hand didn't shake, and it wasn't strategy. It was arithmetic. I'd done 9 years of arithmetic in that family, and I knew that if I said no at that table, I'd be the daughter who wouldn't help her brother's children, and that story would outlive me. There is no version of no that survives a Sunday. So I signed, and Roy Chessman unzipped his black case, and that's when I saw the page. Because when my father lifted the stack to pass it across, the bottom sheet caught on the tablecloth and slid out about 2 inches. 2 inches. Long enough. It had a logo, not a government seal, not law firm letterhead. A mark, a little stylized ridgeline, like a mountain drawn by somebody who'd been paid to draw a mountain. And under it, in that gray 8-point type that forms, exists to hide things in, a line of characters. Escrow number 6, 2-4108. My father put his hand flat on it and slid it back under the stack without looking down, the way you push a dog off a couch. And I did the only thing I actually know how to do. I memorized it. Roy Chessman was working through his book. He asked for my driver's license and copied the number. He had me press my right thumb onto an ink pad and roll it into a little box on the page, which surprised me. I remember thinking, that's thorough. He wrote the time in a column on the left. He had me sign the book on a line. Then he stamped the deed and slid it into a folder and said, "That's it, folks." And I said the small thing. I said, "Would you file it for me? Today, before 5. That's all. It wasn't a trap. Everyone who's heard this story assumes I was being clever, and I wasn't. I was being an auditor. In my line of work, a document that isn't filed isn't a document. It's a draft. 9 years of my life had just come off a piece of paper, and if it was going to come off, I wanted it recorded, dated, stamped, and sitting on a public index where I could look at it and know the thing that happened to me had actually happened. Roy Chessman looked at his watch. He said, "Recorders close Sunday, but I can e-record it first thing tomorrow. It'd be on the index by Tuesday." And my father's hand came across the table and took the folder out of his hands. Not fast. That's the part I still see. Not a snatch. A calm, flat, unhurried reach, the way you take scissors from a child, and I watched my father's face while he did it, and for about a second and a half there was nothing on it at all. No anger, nothing. Just a man reading an instrument panel. He said, "Not today." And then he said the second sentence, the one that broke the whole thing open, though it took me 4 days to understand it. "Nothing in my name gets filed this week." Nobody moved. Trevor stopped turning the keys. That's the thing I noticed. Everybody remembers what my father said. I remember that my brother's hands went still. My mother laughed the way she laughs when a thing has already been decided and said, "Roy, do you want coffee?" And that was that. Roy Chessman closed his book. I watched the red ribbon go in at the page and packed his case, and my father walked him to the door with a hand on his shoulder like they'd known each other for years, and I sat at that table with a fork in front of me and a pen with a dental office on it, and I thought, nobody in this room is surprised except me. I pulled over 6 minutes later in the lot of a closed tire shop and wrote it all down on the back of a gas receipt. That's not drama, that's training. In my job, it's called a contemporaneous note, and the rule is simple. Memory is a liar and paper isn't, so you write it while it's hot and you date it. I've built 3 fraud referrals on the back of somebody's contemporaneous note. I've never once built one on somebody's feelings. So on the back of a gas receipt, in a tire shop parking lot, I wrote, Sunday, June 21st, 1 p.m., Notary Roy Chessman, mobile, quit claim, G plus C to Trevor, blue backer, mom's pen. He's got kids, you're alone. Asked notary to file today. Dad took folder. Not today, nothing in my name gets filed this week. Trevor's hands stopped. Boxes in hall, dining ×3, hall ×1, wedding photo gone, orange tag on T's keys, bottom page, Ridge logo, escrow number 6, 2-4108. I read it back, and I sat there with the engine off in a June parking lot, and I got a very specific, very cold feeling in my chest, and it wasn't about the house. It was about one word, escrow. Because escrow is not a family word. Nobody in my family has ever said escrow at a dinner table in my life. Escrow means a third party is holding money because 2 parties don't trust each other. Escrow means a transaction. Escrow means somebody is buying something. And a number, not a name, a number. 62-4108. Files get numbers when there are enough of them to need numbers. I told myself it was the refinance. They'd refinanced in 2019. Files hang around. Paper is old. I told myself that all the way home. My apartment is 900 square feet, and the radiator clanks, and there is a plastic file box under the window that has, in it, every mortgage statement from May of 2017 to May of this year. I don't keep it because I'm sentimental. I keep it because I'm the person in my family who gets asked to prove things. I sat on the floor with that box open until midnight, and I did what I do. I built a schedule. Column A, date. Column B, amount. Column C, cleared. 9 years of it, from memory of the box, and then from the box itself, and then against my bank download. And when I finished, I sat back on my heels and looked at the last row. April 30th, 2026. $1,418. Cleared. That was the last one. Payment 108. The final payment on my parents' mortgage cleared on the 30th of April, and no one had told me. I found out from a statement. No phone call. No dinner. The house I had paid for was paid for, and my family had let it happen quietly, like a light going off in a room nobody was in. I sat with that for a while. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the 4th ring with the TV on behind her. I said, "The house is paid off." And she said, "And I need you to hear the exact shape of this." She said, "Oh, honey, that was ages ago." Ages ago, 7 weeks. I said, "You didn't tell me." She said, "We didn't want to make a thing of it." I said, "Mom, I paid it." And there was this pause, about a second, and then she said, in a voice like a warm towel, "Nobody's saying you didn't." Which, if you've had a mother like mine, you'll recognize as the exact sound of a door closing. I asked about the boxes. She said, "Decluttering." I asked what was in dining. She said, "Dishes, Clara." I asked why the wedding photo was down, and she said, "Because I'm getting the frame cleaned." and my mother has never had a frame cleaned in her life, and I said okay, and we hung up. midnight, sitting on my floor, surrounded by 9 years of paper, I opened my laptop and pulled up the county recorder's public index. It's free. Anyone can use it. Most people don't know it exists, and if you take one thing from this whole story, take that. Almost everything that was done to me was done in public, on a website, for free, and the only reason it worked for as long as it worked is that nobody expects the daughter to look. I searched the parcel, and there it was. Full reconveyance, recorded May 6, 2026. That's the lender's document. That's the bank standing up in public and saying, "This loan is satisfied. We release our claim. This house is free and clear." Recorded May 6th, 6 days after my last payment cleared. I remember touching the screen, actually touching it with one finger, like an idiot. And then I scrolled down to see what came after it. Nothing. That was the last recorded document on the parcel. Nothing between May 6th and now. What I felt wasn't triumph and it wasn't grief. It was the thing I feel about 3 times a year at work, when a schedule ties out and I realize I've been looking at the wrong schedule. Something happened on May 6th. Something else happened on June 21st. And I was staring at a public record with a hole in it exactly the size of the 7 weeks in between. Monday morning I went to work. I want to tell you what I do because it's the whole reason this story has an ending. I'm an internal auditor for Gray Line Markets. 61 stores. I sit in a windowless room in a distribution center, and I test whether the thing a company says happened actually happened. Vendor rebates, cash over and short, inventory shrink. 90% of it is boring, and the other 10% is people lying to me pleasantly. And here's the only real skill I have. People lie about why. They almost never lie about when. A man will look you in the eye and explain, for 45 minutes with feeling, why he moved $9,000 of promotional credit into a different quarter. He will believe himself. And then you pull the timestamp, and the timestamp says he did it 14 minutes after the auditor's email landed in his inbox, and every word of the 45 minutes turns into nothing. I don't catch thieves. I catch dates. Monday at 7:10 in the morning with a bad coffee, before anybody else was in, I opened a blank spreadsheet, and I did to my own family what I do to a produce vendor. I reconstructed the stack. Not what was said, what was on the table, from memory in order while it was still hot. 1 quitclaim deed, 1 page blue backer. 2. A preliminary change of ownership report. I'd seen the header. In this state, that form has to ride along with a deed when it's recorded. It's how the assessor finds out the house changed hands. 3. Something with a Ridge logo and an escrow number that my father put his hand on. And then I did the part that people never do, and the part that pays my salary. I wrote down what wasn't there. Because here's the thing about auditing. Anybody can read a document. Reading a document tells you what somebody wanted you to see. The absence is what tells you the truth, because nobody stages an absence. An absence is what falls out of a plan when the plan doesn't need it. And there was a form missing from that stack. When a parent transfers a house to a child in this state, there is a claim form, a parent-to-child exclusion claim. Without it, the assessor treats the house as freshly sold at today's value and reassesses it, and the property tax bill on my parents' house would go from roughly $2,200 a year to something north of $7,000. That form is not optional. That form is not obscure. It's the entire reason people do parent-to-child transfers with a professional instead of a website. If you are actually giving your son a house, that claim form is not the 4th thing in the stack. It's the 1st, and it wasn't there. And under the rules we have now, it's worse than a missing form, because that claim isn't a formality anymore. To get the exclusion, my brother would have had to swear the house was his primary residence and move into it inside a year. Swear it, in writing, under penalty of perjury, on a form that goes to a county assessor and sits there forever with his name on it. That's why it wasn't there. You don't sign a lie you're never going to need. I sat in that windowless room and stared at my own handwriting, and I felt the floor tilt about 4 degrees. Because there is exactly one reason you don't bother to protect a house from reassessment. You don't protect a house from next year's tax bill when nobody in your family is going to be paying next year's tax bill. I called my father at 9:20. I want you to know that I called him. I gave him the chance. That matters to me, and it's going to matter later when my mother tells 40 people I ambushed this family. He picked up cheerful. "There's my girl." I said, "Dad, did Roy leave you a claim form for the exclusion?" Beat half a second, maybe less. Then, "Roy handles all that." I said, "So there is one." He said, "Clara, don't start." I said, "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking if there's a form, because if there isn't one, Trevor's tax bill triples in January, and he can't afford that." And my father said, and this is the line I'd put on the wall if I were the kind of person who puts lines on walls. My father said, "Trevor's fine. Trevor's handled." Handled. Not Trevor's covered. Not we've worked it out. Handled. You handle a problem, you handle a claim, you handle a thing that's in your way. He said he had to go, the dog needed out, and my parents' dog died in 2023. I hung up, and I sat there, and I thought about a man who takes a folder out of a notary's hands, calm as a Sunday, and says nothing in my name gets filed this week. This week, not this month, not ever, this week. That's a deadline. People don't say this week unless something happens next week. At lunch, I drove to Roy Chessman's office. He isn't an office. He's a desk in the back of a tax prep storefront in a shopping center with a laundromat and a vape shop, and a laminated sign taped to the counter that said, "Notary, walk-ins, $15 per signature." He was eating a sandwich out of wax paper. He recognized me. I watched him decide not to smile. I said, "Mr. Chessman, I was a signer on a document you notarized on Sunday, June 21st, at my parents' house, a quitclaim deed. I'd like a copy of the journal line item." And he stopped chewing. Here's why I said it in that exact order. In this state, a notary is required by law to keep a sequential journal. Every signature, every date, every time, the document type, the ID, and for anything touching real property, a thumbprint. And that journal is not his private diary. There's a code section, Government Code 8206, and it says that when a member of the public asks in writing and gives the names of the parties, the type of document, and the month and year, the notary shall provide a copy of that line item. Shall, not may. That book is not in my family's house. It's not in my father's control. It's in a black case next to a vape shop, and it belongs to a man with a commission he doesn't want to lose over a pot roast. Roy Chessman wiped his hands on a napkin and said, "You'll have to put it in writing." I said, "I did," and put it on the counter. I'd typed it that morning. He read it twice, and I want to be fair to him. He wasn't scared and he wasn't kind. He was a 60-something man in a windbreaker performing a calculation about liability, and it came out where I knew it would. He said, "Copies are 30 cents a page. There's a research fee." I said, "Fine." He said, "Wednesday." 30 cents a page is what the law lets him charge, and I was buying one page. He charged me $9 and called the rest a research fee, and I paid it without blinking because $8.70 is the cheapest thing I have ever bought. He wrote me a receipt on a carbon paper pad, which I have kept and which I will keep until I die. And walking back to my car across that parking lot in the heat with a $9 receipt in my hand, I remembered the orange tag. I called my brother from the car. He answered on speaker with road noise. I said, "Hey, dumb question. Those keys Sunday, where'd you get them?" And Trevor said, without 1 second of hesitation, because he had nothing to hide from me, and that is the whole tragedy of my brother. "Off the hall table. Dad said they were mine now." I said, "There was an orange thing on them." He said, "Yeah, some plastic tag. I didn't look." I said, "Do you still have it?" He said, "Claire, what is this?" I said it was nothing and told him to say hi to the kids and hung up and sat in that hot car with my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like a student driver. Because I had looked. I'd looked at it for 11 minutes across a pot roast. Bright orange, rectangular, a number stamped in it, and along the bottom edge, small, a phone number. You do not put a phone number on a house key. You put a phone number on a key when the key is going to be handled by somebody who does not live there. Monday evening, I went back to the house. I had a reason. My mother had sent me home Sunday with the leftover pot roast in her good Corningware, and in my family, returning the dish is a load-bearing ritual. Nobody questions a woman at the door holding a clean dish. I got there at 7:10, the porch light was on, and I heard my mother through the screen before I knocked. She was in the kitchen with the phone against her ear and her back to the hallway, and she said, "And I wrote this down and dated it, so I know I'm not improving it." She said, "She signed, yeah, no, it's fine, she's fine." And then she turned and saw me through the screen door, and my mother's face did something I've watched my whole life and never once been able to describe until that night. It didn't fall, it arrived, like a slide changing. She said, "Gotta go," and put the phone down on the counter face down and came to the door with both arms out saying, "Clara, look at you, you brought the dish." I said, "Who was that?" She said, "Your Aunt Verna." My Aunt Verna calls the house line. My Aunt Verna has never in her life called a cell phone because she believes cell phones cost money by the minute, and everyone in that family knows it and jokes about it every Christmas. I said, "Tell her I said hi." And my mother said, "I will," and took the dish out of my hands. I asked to use the bathroom, which is the only lie I told anybody in this entire story, and I want to own it. I didn't need the bathroom, I needed the hallway. The hallway past the bathroom goes to the garage door, and inside the garage my father has what he calls his office, which is a metal desk from a school and a lamp, and 40 years of receipts in a coffee can. The blue backer was gone. That's what I went in for. I wanted to know if the deed was still in this house, and it wasn't on that desk. There was nothing on that desk except a lamp, a stapler, and a stack of mail. But by the garage door, on the floor, leaned against the step, there was an overnight envelope, prepaid, cardboard, sealed and addressed, and sitting there waiting for somebody to drop it in a box in the morning. And I have very good eyes, and it was 8 feet away, and I read the label, Bellwether and Nash, LLP Suite 400. I didn't know what that was. This isn't a story where I'm one step ahead. I was 4 days behind the entire time. It sounded like a law firm, and it sounded like nothing. It sounded like the kind of name that's on the side of a building you drive past. I stood in that doorway for about 6 seconds and read a shipping label, and I wrote it on my hand in the bathroom afterward with a pen from my purse. 2 names and a suite number on the back of my hand, in a bathroom I learned to brush my teeth in. When I came back out, my mother had a checkbook on the counter. She said, "Sit down a minute, honey." And she wrote me a check. She tore it off and slid it across the counter the way my father had slid the deed across the table, which I noticed because they've been married 41 years and people rub off on each other. $5,000. She said, "For your trouble." I looked at it for a while. She'd written it in that big, looping cursive they don't teach anymore, and on the memo line in the corner, she'd written the word gift. My mother, who has never balanced a checkbook in her life, knew enough to write the word gift on a memo line. I said, "For my trouble." She said, "You've done so much, Clara. Your dad and I know that. We do." And I said, "Mom, I paid $153,000. And my mother, and I need you to hear this in the voice, the warm towel voice, the voice she uses on nurses and on the man at the tire shop and on me. My mother said, "And that's between you and God, honey. Between me and God. Not between me and them, not between me and the ledger. Between me and God, where there's no receipt and no index and nothing to look up and no way to prove anything, forever." I took the check. I want to be honest. I took it. I put it in my purse and said thank you and hugged her, and she smelled like the same hand lotion she's used since 1998, and I drove home. It's still in my purse. It's not cashed. I look at it sometimes. And you need to remember the number because I didn't understand it for 2 more days. $5,000 for my trouble on a Monday night. At the time, I thought it was guilt money. I sat in my car and felt something soften in my chest and thought, okay, they know. She knows. That's her saying sorry in the only language she has. It wasn't guilt money. It was a price. And they'd already used it once. I texted him at 12:48 that night, lying in the dark with the phone on my chest. "Send me a picture of the tag." That's it. No explanation. And my brother, God help him, sent it in 3 minutes because Trevor has never in his life asked why. The photo came in at 12:51 on Tuesday morning, a bright orange plastic tag on a scratched van floor mat, and on it, stamped in black, Vantage Property Inspections, and a number, and under the number, in smaller type, a job code. I called it at 8:04 that morning from the fire lane behind my building, before I'd even gone up for coffee. A woman answered on the second ring, cheerful, the way somebody is when they take 40 calls a day. I said I was calling about a key tag with a job code on it, and I read her the code and said I was an owner of the property and wanted to know when the inspection was done. She typed, keys clicking, 2 seconds of hold music that was somehow worse than silence. Then she said, "Yep, full inspection, 4-point plus roof and sewer scope. We were out there May 26th. And I said very pleasantly, because that is a skill, "Who ordered it?" And she said, "The client did." I said, "I'm on title." She said, "I understand, but the report goes to whoever ordered it, hun." I said, "Thank you." And I stood in a fire lane in the heat with my phone in my hand, and I looked at the date, May 26th. Tuesday, May 26th. I want to tell you what happened on Tuesday, May 26th. I called my mother that morning to say I'd swing by after work with a box fan because it was 91 degrees and their air conditioning has been dying since the Obama administration. And she said, "Oh, honey, not today. Your dad's back is out. He's flat on the floor. He's a bear. And I said, okay, of course. And I dropped the fan at the door on Thursday instead, and my dad carried it inside himself. So on the day a sewer scope and a roof inspection were being run on a house I had paid $153,000 into, somebody was walking through my parents' living room with a clipboard and a sewer camera, and my mother was on the phone telling me my father was flat on the floor. Somebody in my family had lied to me, out loud, on a Tuesday in May, so that I would not drive past a truck. That's the moment. If you're waiting for the moment, I stopped being somebody's daughter and started being an auditor. It wasn't the deed. The deed I could survive. The deed was cruel, but at least honest. They did it to my face, in daylight, with a pen from a dentist. The box fan is what did it. Tuesday afternoon, I took a personal day I didn't need, and I sat in my apartment with a legal pad and the number I'd memorized. 62-4108. Here's the thing about escrow numbers. They aren't secret. They're a file number, like a work order at a body shop. But you can't Google one. Every title and escrow company in the county runs its own numbering. There's no central list, and there is no database. You have to do the stupid thing. So I did the stupid thing. I made a list of every title and escrow company in the county with a physical office. There were 9. I started calling. This is the part with no drama in it, and it's the part that actually won, so I'm not skipping it. I called 9 companies over 2.5 hours and said the same sentence every time, and I'd rehearsed it out loud twice, because if you get the sentence wrong, they hang up on you. Not, "Hi, I think my dad's selling my house." That gets you nothing. That gets you a receptionist who says, "We can't discuss other people's files." And she's right. The sentence was, "Hi, this is Clara Palmer. I'm an owner of record on the property in your file number 62-4108. I'd like to request a copy of the preliminary title report." That's it. Every word in there is load-bearing. Owner of record. That's not a feeling. That's a fact on a public index, and they can check it in 12 seconds. Preliminary title report. That's the thing I'm allowed to have, because it's a report about my property, and my name is on the report. And 62-4108. That's the number that proves I'm not phishing, because a person phishing doesn't have your file number. 7 companies said the number wasn't theirs. One said it in a way that made me call back and confirm, and it wasn't. The 9th was Harborline Title and Escrow on the 2nd floor of a building with an orthodontist in it. A woman picked up and said, "Escrow, this is Pam." I said my sentence. And there was a pause, not a shocked pause, a working pause, the sound of somebody typing a number into a field. Then Pam Ostrander said, "Okay, and you're Palmer, Clara J?" And my ears started ringing. Because I hadn't given her my parcel. I hadn't given her an address. I'd given her a number I read off a piece of paper for 2 seconds across a pot roast, and a stranger in an office I'd never been to had just read my own name back to me off a file I'd never been told existed. I said, "That's me." She said, "You want the prelim? I can email it. What's your address? I have to confirm it against the vesting." I gave her the address of the house, not my apartment. The house, because that's what's on the deed. She said, "Perfect, 1 second." And I heard the click of an email being built by somebody who had done it 4,000 times and did not know she was handing a woman a knife. She said, "Sent." I said, "Pam, one more thing. When was this file opened?" And she said, in the flat, pleasant, absolutely uninterested voice of a professional reading a field off a screen, "Opened May 11th. I said, "Thank you," and I hung up and I opened the email. It was 11 pages. Preliminary report. At the top, that logo. The little stylized ridgeline drawn by somebody who'd been paid to draw a mountain. And on page 1, in a box in gray 8-point type, there was a line. Proposed insured Cardinal Ridge Holdings, LLC. I read it 4 times. A preliminary title report is what a title company writes when somebody is about to buy a house and wants insurance that they're really getting it. The proposed insured is the buyer. That's the whole thing. That line is a title company writing down in advance the name of whoever the house is about to belong to. The house was not being given to my brother. The house was being sold to a company, and it had been being sold to a company since May 11th. 6 weeks. 6 weeks before my mother slid me her pen. 6 weeks before my father said, "He's got kids, you're alone." 6 weeks before my brother sat across a pot roast turning a stranger's keys over in his hands. And then I did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is the reason I'm telling you this at all. My last mortgage payment cleared April 30th. The escrow opened May 11th. 11 days. 11 days. They waited 9 years for me to finish, and then they gave it 11 days. I sat on that floor long enough that the light changed. And what was going through my head wasn't a plan and it wasn't rage. It was a reread. Every single thing that happened at that table changed meaning while I sat there. He's got kids. You're alone. That wasn't a cruelty. That was a line. Somebody wrote that line. It was the tool that made a quitclaim look like a family decision instead of a step in a transaction. It wasn't my father's opinion of me. It was a key cut to fit a lock, and the lock was me. My mother's pen? She brought her own pen to the table. You bring your own pen when you have been imagining a signature. Trevor's stillness when my father said nothing gets filed this week. My brother wasn't confused. My brother was being careful. And the fight I'd been having in my chest since Sunday. The fight where my little brother got the house and I got a sentence about being alone. That fight did not exist. There was no fight. There was never a fight between me and Trevor. Trevor wasn't beating me. Trevor and I were both materials. We were both something my father needed in order to hand a house to a company called Cardinal Ridge. The only difference between my brother and me is that they'd told him a little more of the truth and charged him more for it than he knew. Okay, stop. Before I take you into what Cardinal Ridge actually is, do something for me because you're going to want to be on record for this. Comment right now, before you hear the rest. What do you think my father needed $610,000 in cash for, badly enough to sell his daughters 9 years for it? Say it now. Because the real answer is smaller and colder than whatever you're about to type, and I want to see who gets there first. And hit subscribe, because the next part is the part where I stopped being confused and started being expensive. Tuesday night, I opened the Secretary of State's business search. It's free. It takes 9 seconds. I typed in Cardinal Ridge Holdings, LLC. It came right up. Registered 2 years ago. Active. Manager managed. And there was the agent for service of process. Bellwether and Nash, LLP. I stopped breathing. Because I had read that name 28 hours earlier, off a shipping label, on the floor of my father's garage, 8 feet away, standing in a doorway with a pot roast dish in my hands. I'd written it on the back of my hand in a bathroom. I'd had it in ballpoint on my skin all day Tuesday and washed it off at some point without thinking about it, because it had meant nothing. A law firm, not a person, not a guy named Cardinal. A law firm was the registered agent, which is what you do when you have a lot of LLCs and you don't want any of them attached to a human being with a home address. And my father was overnighting them something on Monday night. 2 days after he told a notary that nothing in his name gets filed this week. So I looked up Bellwether and Nash, and they have a website because everybody has a website, and the website was not for lawyers. It was a landing page, big photo of a smiling couple on a porch, and in letters 4 inches high. We buy houses for cash, any condition, no agents, no repairs, no showings, close in 14 days. I laughed out loud, alone, in my kitchen at midnight. It was not a good laugh. No agents, no showings, no sign in the yard. And I went back to page 1 of the prelim, and I found the number I'd skated past the first time, in the box under the vesting. Sales price, $610,000. And I sat there and I thought, that's low. I'm not a realtor, but I have been driving past that street for 9 years, and I know what the corner house went for last October, because I looked it up the way you look up your own street when you're bored. So I did it properly. I pulled 6 sales within 4 blocks in the last 8 months. I built a grid, because building a grid is the only reflex I have left. Square footage, lot, beds, baths, condition. The number came out somewhere around $698. $698, and he'd agreed to $610. $88,000. He was leaving $88,000 on the table, and 44 of those $1,000 were mine. And that's when I understood the ugliest fact in this entire story. When I got there, I put my forehead on my knees. Ask yourself what $88,000 buys. It doesn't buy speed. He didn't need to close in 14 days. He closed 6 weeks out. It doesn't buy a cash offer, because a house that's free and clear at $698 in that neighborhood would have had cash offers before lunch. $88,000 bought him no sign in the yard. That's the whole product. No listing, no MLS, nothing on Zillow. No photographs of my mother's kitchen on the internet, where a daughter who drives past that house every morning on her way to work might see them. My father discounted a house $88,000 for the specific and only purpose of making sure I didn't find out. And he only got to spend $44,000 of his own money doing it. The other $44,000 was mine. He billed me half the cost of my own blindfold. At 3 in the morning, I did the thing I'd been avoiding since Sunday. I looked up my brother. The county's civil index is public. Same website, same free. You type a name and a birth year, and it gives you every judgment docketed against that person in this county. Because a judgment is a thing the public is entitled to know about. That's not an accident of the law. That's the point of it. Palmer, Trevor J. 2 hits. 1. Child support arrears. $19,200. Docketed March of this year. 2. Mercer Financial Services versus Trevor J. Palmer. $31,000. Docketed February. $50,200 sitting on the county index with my brother's name on it in public for anybody with a laptop. And I sat in the dark and I put it together, and it was so clean and so simple and so cold that I made a noise out loud. Here's how a judgment lien works, and I'll say it once. No lawyer voice. When somebody wins a money judgment against you and records it with the county, it becomes a lien. And that lien doesn't just sit on the property you own today. It attaches to any real property in that county the second your name lands on the record. The instant. Not after a hearing, not after a notice. The moment title vests in you, that lien is on it, and it's on it ahead of anybody who comes after. Which means the second Trevor J. Palmer becomes an owner of record of that house, $50,200 of somebody else's money is stapled to it. And here's where I had it wrong for 10 minutes, which I'm telling you because being wrong is the only part of this job that ever teaches anybody anything. My first thought was, the title company doesn't know. My second thought was, don't be stupid, Clara. The title company knew before you did. They'd already searched him. Of course they had. That's what those 11 pages are. A stranger typing names into an index and writing down what falls out. They ran Trevor J. Palmer on May 11th, 6 weeks before my mother slid me her pen, and they did not blink because judgments are not a scandal to a title company. Judgments are a line item. They come off the top, out of the proceeds, at the closing table, and everybody shakes hands and goes to lunch. That was never the secret. I'd spent 4 days waiting to catch my father hiding my brother's debt from the buyer, and the buyer had been looking straight at it since spring. Now hold that and take my father's sentence back out of your pocket. Nothing in my name gets filed this week. Everybody heard that as a man protecting himself. His name, his week, his secret. It was never about his name, it was about who pays. Because $50,200 of my brother's debt was going to be settled at that closing table, out of the sale of a house that was half mine. That's what off the top means. Off the top means before anybody's half. $25,100 of my 9 years wired to a collection agency and a child support account to make my brother's name clean enough to carry a house across a room. 17 months of my life spent quietly paying off a man who sat 4 feet from me, turning keys over in his fingers while my father explained that I was alone. And then the 90 seconds. If the deed to Trevor records on Monday, my brother is an owner of record on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 4 days with his name on a house on a public index, and 4 days is 4 days in which a man who already has 2 judgments against him can collect a third. A garnishment. A bankruptcy somebody else files for him. Every one of those lands on that house the instant it lands on him, and nobody prices a surprise, and a cash buyer with a law firm for a registered agent does not renegotiate when a surprise shows up. They walk. They have 40 other houses. But if the deed to Trevor and the deed out to Cardinal Ridge record back-to-back, same batch, same Friday morning, if my brother owns that house for 90 seconds at 9 in the morning between 2 stamps, then nothing new has time to walk through the door behind him. 90 seconds isn't fast. 90 seconds is airtight. It's a window cut narrow enough that the only things inside it are the things my father already knew about. And here's the part nobody told my brother. 90 seconds does not mean nothing sticks to you. 90 seconds is plenty. It's long enough for a lien to attach and long enough for a gain to land. My father knew that. Trevor heard 90 seconds and heard, I'm not even really in it. That's what the number was always for. The plan didn't need a slogan. 90 seconds is the thing you say to a frightened man, so he stops asking what he's holding. My father did not want the deed filed early because early was the only thing that could kill it. He wasn't afraid of the deed being unfiled. That's what everybody assumes. The whole world assumes a man who takes a document back is hiding it. He was afraid of it being filed on time. And I sat there at 3 in the morning and I realized my father knew about those judgments. He had to. That whole 90-second architecture only exists as an answer to a problem. And the problem is my brother's debt. And you don't build the answer if you don't know the problem. My father knew my brother was $50,000 underwater, and he gave him a house anyway. You do not give a house to a man you know has judgments against him. Not if it's a gift, not for 1 second. If it's a gift, his creditors eat it before he's had a chance to change the locks. The only way you hand a house to a man with $50,000 of liens on his name is if you never intended him to hold it. Trevor wasn't chosen because he was loved. Trevor was chosen because he was the cheapest name to walk it through, and because he was the only person in that house that a tax bill could stick to. At 8:40 on Wednesday morning, my father came to my office. He has never been to my office. In 9 years, he has never once asked what building I work in. I work in a distribution center off the frontage road with a lobby the size of a bathroom and a receptionist named Dee behind glass. And at 8:40 in the morning, Dee called my desk and said, in a voice I'd never heard her use, "Clara, there's a Gordon here for you. He's darling." He was in the lobby holding 2 coffees. He'd gotten one for me. He knew how I take it, which surprised me, and I have thought about that more than anything else in this whole story. My father, who did not know what building I worked in, knew that I take it with 1 sugar. He said, "Walk me out, it's nice out." So we walked out into a parking lot, past a truck being loaded with pallets of paper towels, and my father put on the voice, the reasonable one, the one with a little laugh underneath it. He said, "Your mother says you were funny Monday." I said, "Funny how?" He said, "About the dish. Not about the check, about the dish." And then, about 4 steps later, with his coffee in his hand, looking straight ahead at the frontage road, my father said, "Did you call somebody?" And there it was. Understand the position he was in. My father had a daughter who had asked a notary to file a deed at a lunch table. That's all he had. 4 days of silence, no lawyer's letter, no phone call, and a man who had arranged every element of a $610,000 transaction 6 weeks in advance had driven 22 minutes across town on a Wednesday morning to ask a question, because he couldn't stand not knowing. He was blind. He'd been blind since Sunday afternoon, and I had 11 pages, a phone number, an inspection date, a notary's journal on order, and the word bellwether written on the back of my hand in ballpoint. Nobody has ever had that much on my father in his life. I said, "I call people all day, Dad. It's my job." He said, "Clara." I said, "Who would I call?" And he stopped walking. And I watched my father decide not to say a name. I watched it happen. He opened his mouth, and there was a name in it. And he swallowed it, because saying it would tell me it existed. And this is a man who has spent 63 years never handing anybody a piece of information for free. So instead he said, "Whatever you think you're doing, I want it done by Friday." Friday. He said it out loud next to a pallet of paper towels because he couldn't help it. That's what a deadline does to a person. You can hold the buyer's name and the price and the escrow number and 6 weeks of it, and then it walks out of you sideways, in a sentence about your daughter's behavior. I said, "What happens Friday?" And he said, "Nothing happens Friday." And I said, "Okay." We walked back, and about 10 feet from the door, my father said the thing that I think he'd actually driven 22 minutes to say, and it's the only moment in this entire story where I think he was telling the truth. He said, "You know what your problem is? You keep score." I said, "Somebody had to." And he laughed. He genuinely laughed and shook his head like I'd told a decent joke and said, 9 years and you never once said no. You know that? Not once. Every 30th of the month, right on time. He tapped the roof of his truck twice, the way he does. "Your mother said you'd never say no." And then my father got in his truck and drove away. I sat with that for the long time, standing outside a distribution center, holding a coffee with 1 sugar in it. They knew. Of course they knew. My reliability wasn't a virtue in that house. It was a specification. Something they measured 9 years earlier in a hospital parking lot and then built around, the way you build around a load-bearing wall. Nobody asked Trevor in 2017 because Trevor wouldn't have made it in March. They asked me because I would make it in March, and in every March after that, until the wall was paid for and they could knock it down. I went back inside. Dee said through the glass, "Your dad is so sweet." I said, "He is." And I went to my desk and opened my notes file and wrote, Wednesday, June 24th, 8:40 a.m. Dad came to my office in person. Never been here. 2 coffees, knows my order. Asked, "Did you call somebody?" Would not say a name. Said, "I want it done by Friday." Then said, "Nothing happens Friday." Said, "Your mother said you'd never say no." And I looked at that for about a minute, and then I saw it. He came in person. He didn't call, he didn't text, he didn't email. My father drove 22 minutes each way through morning traffic to ask a question he could have texted, in a parking lot where there is no recording, no timestamp, no header, no thread, nothing. A man who is comfortable does not do that. A man who is comfortable sends a text that says, "Hey kiddo, everything okay?" In 4 days, from a man who has my number in his phone, I got 0 texts. He drove. And that told me something 11 pages of preliminary report couldn't, which is that my father knew, not suspected knew, that there was something in this that could be read back to him later. He'd been careful for 6 weeks. He was careful for a reason. And I sat at my desk in a windowless room and I thought, he came here to find out what I have. Which means he doesn't know what I have. Which means, for the first time in 33 years, I'm holding something my father can't reach across a table and take. Wednesday at noon, I went back to the tax prep storefront. Roy Chessman had it in a manila envelope with my name on it in ballpoint. He didn't say hello. He said, "Sign here that you got it," and slid me a log. And I signed a log to receive a photocopy of a log, which is the most honest moment in this entire story. I didn't open it in the store. I opened it in my car, in a shopping center, with a laundromat on one side and a vape shop on the other and the AC blowing on my hands. It was one photocopied page. Sequential lines, ruled columns, the little inked squares where the thumbprints go, and a diagonal streak on the copy where the book hadn't lain flat on the glass. June 21st, 2026, 3 entries. 12:41 p.m. Palmer, Gordon R. Quitclaim deed. Thumbprint, signature. 12:44 p.m. Palmer, Trevor J. Grant deed. Thumbprint, signature. 1:06 p.m. Palmer, Clara J. Quitclaim deed. Thumbprint, signature. I got there at 12:46. Read those times again with me. 12:41. My father signs the deed that takes the house off him and me and puts it on Trevor. 12:44. My brother signs a grant deed. 1:06. I sign. 12:44. 2 minutes before I walked through the front door and asked if the notary was a friend of my dad's. While I was parking at the curb, while I was locking my car, my brother had already signed the house away to somebody. A grant deed, not a quitclaim. A grant deed, which is what a buyer's title company makes you sign, because a buyer paying $610,000 in cash wants promises. My brother had signed the sale. He had signed it before I got there. He signed it, and then he sat down, and then he put his beer on the table and turned a set of keys over in his fingers. And let my father say he's got kids. You're alone. While a page with his signature on it sat 4 feet away inside a blue backer. 2 minutes. That's the margin they left, and I've thought about that more than I want to admit, that they cut it that close, and that they were right to. I parked. I walked in. I asked if the man in my chair was a friend of my dad's. I wasn't a guest at that lunch. I was the last signature, and I'd been served pot roast to keep me in the chair until they got it. But here's the thing I couldn't get past, and it kept me in that parking lot for 20 minutes. Trevor signed a grant deed at 12:44. To who? Because he doesn't know. I'd bet my apartment. My brother is not capable of holding a name like Cardinal Ridge Holdings in his head for 4 days, and then sitting across from me, turning keys over, and saying nothing. Trevor can't lie. Trevor's whole face is a subtitle track. He signed it. He just never read it. I got a text at 2:15 that afternoon. It was from Nora, my brother's wife. It was a photo of 4 fabric samples fanned out on a bedspread. Cream, oatmeal, a blue-gray, and a stripe. Which one for the front room? Micah says the stripe, but Micah is 6. I looked at that photo for a very long time. Nora is 29. She works at a dental office, which is where the pen came from, and she is the only reason I go to Christmas. She had measured for curtains. She had stood at the front window of a house that was sold on May 11th with a tape measure and written numbers on the back of an envelope. And then she'd gone to a fabric store on a Wednesday afternoon and texted her sister-in-law about a stripe. And I understood, sitting in that car, that the only true believer in the whole building, the one person in my family who completely believed there was a gift, was the one person who was never told anything. Not my ally, not my rescuer, just the person they'd lied to for free, because it cost them nothing and it made the story look right from the outside. I typed the stripe. Micah's right. Then I deleted it and I typed, "Don't buy anything yet." Then I deleted that too, and I put my phone face down on the passenger seat, and I want to tell you something about myself that isn't flattering. I did not answer her. Wednesday evening, I met my brother in the parking lot of a hardware store. I told him I needed a windshield chip looked at, which was true. He pulled up in the van with the ladder rack and got out with his resin kit, and he was happy to see me. That's the thing, he's always happy to see me. He worked on the chip, and I stood beside him with my arms crossed and asked my brother questions the way I ask a produce manager questions, which is a thing I will have to live with. I said, "Trev, what'd you sign Sunday?" He said, "The deed thing." I said, "Just the one?" And he was quiet for about 2 seconds, working the resin with a little tool, and then he said, "Dad had a couple. He had them tabbed." Tabbed, little sticky arrows, sign here, sign here. I said, "Did you read them?" And Trevor laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Claire, it's Dad. It's Dad." That's my brother's entire relationship with paper. And my father has known that about him since Trevor was 15 and signed a car loan he didn't understand at a dealership on Del Rey. I said, "What are you getting?" And that stopped him. He straightened up. He looked at me over the hood, and for a second I saw him decide whether to lie. And my brother is not built for it, so what came out instead was defensive. He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I paid $153,000 into that house, Trev. I think I get to ask one question." He wiped his hands on a rag longer than the rag needed. Then he said, 40. I said, 40 what? He said, 40 grand, 5 up front. And then, fast, because he heard how it sounded, "It's not like that, Claire. Dad's got it structured. I'm not even really in it. It's 90 seconds. 5 up front." I had $5,000 in my purse. It had been in my purse since Monday night, in my mother's looping cursive, with the word gift on the memo line. The same number? They had a rate. There was a rate in that family, and it was $5,000. And my mother had reached for it without thinking, the way you reach for a light switch in a house you grew up in. 5 to get Trevor in the chair. 5 to keep Clara out of it. 9 years, $153,000, and 108 payments. And when my mother sat down at a counter on a Monday night to price me, she wrote down the deposit. 90 seconds. He said it like a joke he'd been told by somebody smarter. He even smiled a little, proud, the way he used to smile when he'd repeat something Dad said at the dinner table when he was 9. 90 seconds and I'm out. Dad said it's 90 seconds. So there it was, out of my brother's own mouth, in a hardware store parking lot, with resin curing on my windshield. Trevor knew he was a pass-through. He'd taken $5,000 to be a name for 90 seconds and let his father tell his sister that she was alone. And I did not feel better. I wanted him to be guilty. I'd wanted it for 4 days. Instead, I stood there and watched him be proud of the smallest, saddest deal anybody in my family has ever made. And I thought, they got him for $5 grand and a sentence about how he's got kids. Then I said, "Trev, what's your basis in the house?" And he said, "My what?" I said it again, "Your basis." He said, "Is that like the value?" And I said no, and I didn't explain it. Here's what I could have explained in the parking lot for free. When somebody gifts you property, you don't get to start the clock over. You inherit their number, their basis. My grandmother's estate put that house in my father's name in 1994 at $180,000. That's the number the house carries. Not what it's worth today. What it was worth the day my grandmother died, 32 years ago. The house doesn't forget. The mall, though. And my half carries the same number, because my father gave me my half, too. Nobody buys their way onto a title with a mortgage payment. 9 years of transfers didn't move that number by $1. So when that house passes to Trevor as a gift, from both of us, Trevor's basis is $180,000. And when Trevor sells it 90 seconds later for $610,000, the gain is $430,000. It isn't his house. He doesn't live there. So there's no exclusion, nothing to shelter it. That gain is his. All of it. Federal, and the surtax on top of the federal, and then this state, which does not believe in capital gains at all and taxes them like a paycheck. That's somewhere in the neighborhood of $115,000 in tax, in a document that shows up next spring with his name on it. 40 grand up front, 115 due in April. My father wasn't giving my brother a house. My father was selling a house through my brother and handing him the bill. And that's why it was Trevor. Not because Trevor has kids, because Trevor is the only person in that family a tax bill could stick to. My father's name never touches the sale at all, in his version. His daughter's name comes off. His son's name flashes on the record for 90 seconds and then flashes off. And when the letter comes, the letter has my brother's name on it, and my brother's judgments underneath it, and my brother's 2 kids in the other room, and my father is in Arizona. I got in my car, and I said thanks for the windshield, and I drove away. And I didn't tell him. I want to say that out loud because I've had 3 weeks to make it sound better, and it doesn't get better. I sat at a red light on Grand, and I did the coldest math of my entire life, and I decided not to tell my brother that he was about to eat a $115,000 bill. Here's why, and you can decide what you think of me. If I told Trevor on Wednesday night, Trevor tells Dad by Wednesday night, not out of malice, out of habit, because he's called Dad first about everything since he was 9, and he'd have picked up the phone before I got to the freeway. And then my father, who is not stupid, who has never once been surprised in my presence, rewrites it. He finds a different name. He finds a cousin. He finds an 80-year-old aunt in Yuma. He does it in July instead of June, and it goes through, and my brother eats the tax bill anyway, in silence, in a year, alone. There was exactly 1 hour left in the world when the truth could still do my brother any good. It was Thursday at 6, at my parents' dining room table, in front of everybody who has ever told me I was being difficult. Because the truth in that room, out loud, in front of 20 people, is the only version of the truth my father can't take out of a notary's hands. So I went home and I opened my laptop and I wrote 1 paragraph. It took me 2 hours to write 1 paragraph, 86 words long when I finished, and I'm going to tell you what was in it, because it's the least dramatic thing I have ever written, and it is the reason my father is renting. It said, I am Clara J. Palmer, an owner of record of the property in your file 62-4108, vested as tenants in common. I have not conveyed my interest. Any instrument bearing my signature dated June 21st was retained by Gordon R. Palmer in my presence and in the presence of the notary, and was never delivered to any grantee. I object to the recording of any such instrument and to the closing of any transaction that requires my interest. Please forward this to your underwriter. That's it. That's the whole weapon. No lawsuit, no lien, no injunction, no process server. 86 words in an email to a woman named Pam who was going to have a perfectly normal Friday. Because here is what almost nobody understands about how a house gets sold. And it took me 9 years and 1 pot roast to learn it. Nobody buying a house for $610,000 in cash is buying the house. They're buying the title insurance. That's the actual product. The buyer's money doesn't move because the buyer trusts my father. The buyer's money moves because an underwriter, in an office somewhere, has signed a piece of paper promising to pay if the title turns out to be bad. And an underwriter is not brave. An underwriter is the least brave organism that has ever existed. An underwriter will not insure over a dispute, not a small one, not one from a crank, and especially not one from a woman whose name is sitting on the vesting line of their own preliminary report, in their own gray 8-point type. The second that email lands, Harborline cannot insure that sale. Not because I'm powerful, because I'm on the paper. I didn't have to do anything to my family. I had to refuse to do the one thing they'd asked me to do, and then say so, in writing, to a stranger. I finished it at 11:40 on Wednesday night. I saved it as a draft, and I did not send it. I want to be honest about why I waited, and it isn't nobility. If I send it Wednesday night, Pam calls the file Thursday morning. Pam calls my father Thursday morning, and my father spends Thursday doing the thing he has done my whole life, which is arranging. And by 6 o'clock, when I walked into that house, he'd have had a version ready, and my mother would have had a face ready, and 20 people would have been told, gently, before I arrived, that Clara had gotten confused about some paperwork and was going through something. He's not a liar, he's the man who gets there first. So for one day, I got there first. My mother's text came in Thursday morning at 7:02. Tonight, 6 o'clock, everyone's coming. Wear something nice, be happy for your brother. 22 people. My mother had made a Facebook event for it. There is a Facebook event, and it is still up, and the cover photo is a picture of the house. Thursday, June 25th. I worked a full day. I want you to know that. I sat in a windowless room, and I finished a rebate schedule for a yogurt vendor, and I emailed it to my manager at 3:55 with a note about a variance. And then I sat there with my hands flat on the desk. At 4:11 in the afternoon, I opened the draft, and I added one line to the top. Pam, as discussed Tuesday. And I attached the photocopy of the notary journal, and I hit send. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up, and then I put on something nice. I got to my parents' house at 6:20, on purpose, late enough that everybody was already inside. There were 9 cars on the street, my Aunt Verna's van, my cousin Dean's truck with the ladder rack. Somebody had put a folding table on the porch with a cooler under it. I walked in with a manila folder in my hand. 6 pages. That's all I brought. No lawyer, no speech, no printouts of anything I'd been feeling. The hallway boxes were gone, and standing in that spot with a folder in my hand, I finally understood what had been in them. You don't label a box dining when you're decluttering a dining room. When you're clearing a room out, you label the box by what's in it. China, junk, goodwill. You label a box dining when you're telling a man in a truck which room it comes out of and which room it goes into at the other end. Those weren't decluttering boxes. Those were movers' boxes. My mother had packed for Arizona 3 days before she threw a party to celebrate giving my brother a house. The rectangle on the wall was still there, and the front room was full. 22 people in a house that seats 12, holding paper plates, and on the mantel, I need you to see this, there was a photograph in a frame, an 8x10 of the house, the actual house we were standing in. Somebody had gone to a drugstore kiosk and printed a picture of the house and put it on the mantel of the house, and the frame was the frame from the hallway. My parents' wedding photo had been taken out of its frame so a picture of the house could go in it. I stood there and looked at that for about 4 seconds, and then Nora hugged me. She had a fabric sample in her back pocket. The stripe, I could see the corner of it. Trevor was by the window with a beer, sunburned, grinning, being congratulated by our cousin Dean. And on the sideboard, next to a bowl of chips, there was a stack of fabric samples and a tape measure. My father was in the doorway to the kitchen in a collared shirt. At about 6:40, he tapped a bottle with a ring and the room went quiet, because it always does, and he gave a toast. It was 40 seconds long. He said that a house is just a box. He said that what matters is who's growing up in the box. He said, "Trev and Nora, this family looks after its own." And everybody said, "Aw," and my Aunt Verna put her hand on her chest. And my mother, standing next to him, looked across that room directly at me and said loud enough with a smile on, "And Clara was such a help. 9 years, honey, and you couldn't do one little thing for your brother without making it complicated." 22 people heard it. About 6 of them laughed the way you laugh when a mother is being a mother. I said, "I did do it. I signed." She said, "Eventually." And I said, "Sunday at 1:06. Something in her face did a very small thing. And I turned to my brother, and I said it in a completely normal voice, not loud. The voice you'd use to ask somebody to pass the salt. It's the only voice I know how to use in that house. I said, "Trev, what time do you sign for Cardinal Ridge tomorrow?" And my brother said, "Who?" That's it. That's the whole thing. That's the sentence I paid 9 years and $153,000 for. Who? He didn't say it defensively. He said it the way you say it when somebody asks you about a person you've never met. He said it, and then he smiled a little, waiting for the punchline, holding a beer. And the room, which is not a smart room, but is a room full of people who have known each other for 40 years, went quiet in a way that a room can only go quiet when it has just heard something wrong. And then 22 people turned and looked at my father. Nobody told them to. Nobody pointed. Verna turned first, then Dean, then the rest, in about a second and a half, like water finding a drain, because everybody in that room had spent their whole life knowing who to look at when something in this family stopped making sense. And my father said nothing. That's the part I'll keep. 63 years old in a collared shirt with a bottle in his hand, 22 people looking at him, and my father, who has an answer for everything, who has never lost a room, who took a folder out of a notary's hands as calmly as taking scissors from a child, said nothing at all. Then he said, "Clara, kitchen." And I said, "No?" I put the folder on the sideboard, on top of the fabric samples, and I didn't open it. I want you to notice that. I never opened it. I never read anything out loud. That was the entire plan, and it was the right plan. I said, "It's a preliminary title report. It's about this house. Anybody can read it." And Aunt Verna, 68, in reading glasses on a beaded chain, who has never done a single interesting thing in her life, picked it up. Because when you put a document down in front of 22 bored people at a party that has just gone strange, somebody always picks it up. That's not luck. That's the most reliable law in the universe. She read the top of page 1 out loud, slowly, the way people read forms. Preliminary report, harbor line title and escrow. Pause. Proposed insured, Cardinal Ridge Holdings, LLC. And she stopped and looked up and said to nobody, "What's Cardinal Ridge?" My father said, "It's a formality." There it is. That's the lie, and it's a good one. It's the best available lie. It's the lie of a man improvising for the first time in 30 years. And I said, okay, what's the formalities phone number? He said, Clara. And I said, because I have it. It's Harbor Line. It's on Fremont above the orthodontist. The escrow officer is Pam Ostrander, and the file number is 62-4108. I've been talking to her since Tuesday. Anybody in this room can call. It takes 12 seconds to confirm a proposed insured, and I'd like somebody who isn't me to do it. Nobody called. Nobody had to. 6 people had their phones out already. And Verna, still reading because Verna reads everything, said, "It says opened May 11th. The room did something then that I've never heard a room do. It didn't gasp. It exhaled. Because everybody in that house had just done the same subtraction at the same time. And it's the only subtraction that matters. And my mother had put it in a Facebook event herself. They thought they were at a party for a gift that had been given on Sunday. And Dean, my cousin who installs HVAC and has never once been the smartest person in a room, said it out loud. That's like a month and a half before Sunday. My father said, that's a preliminary, that's paperwork, that doesn't mean anything's sold. Stronger evidence, that's how this works. I said, Trev, Sunday, what did you sign at 12:44? He said, I got there at like 12:30, I signed the deed thing. I said, you signed 2 things. He said, no. And I said, 12:41, Dad signed a quitclaim. 12:44, you signed a grant deed. 106 I signed. It's in the notary's book. It's got your thumbprint next to it. I have the page. And I put my finger on the folder. I still didn't open it. Trevor put his beer down on the windowsill. He put it down badly. It went over. Nobody picked it up. There was a beer emptying itself onto my mother's carpet for the rest of this, and not one person moved. He said, it was tabbed. He had it tabbed. I said, I know. He said, I didn't sign anything to anybody. It was for you. Dad said it was to clean up the... And then my brother stopped talking in the middle of a sentence, and I watched my brother's face do the thing that faces do about 4 seconds before the person catches up. He said quietly, why would I sign a grant deed? And that's when the room turned again, and this time it wasn't a second and a half. It was instant. 22 people, all at once, at my father. And my father... And I swear to you this is exactly what happened. My father reached over and took the folder off the sideboard. The same reach. The exact same calm, flat, unhurried reach. Like taking scissors from a child. 4 days later, in front of his whole family at a party he threw, my father reached out and took the paper. And I let him. I said, it's a copy, Dad. Pam has the original, and so does the underwriter. I sent it at 4:11. He looked at me, and then his phone went off. It was on the counter, face up, next to a bowl of chips, 6 feet from Aunt Verna, and it lit up and buzzed against the granite, and everyone heard it, and everyone looked at it, and it said, Bellwether and Nash, LLP. At 7:04 on a Thursday night, 2 hours and 53 minutes. That's the transit time. That's how long it takes a hold to walk from an escrow officer's screen, to an underwriter, to a buyer's counsel, to a law firm's phone, to my father's granite countertop. I hadn't arranged it. I'd started it at 4:11 at a desk with a yogurt rebate open in the other window, and it had been walking toward that kitchen ever since. Everybody in that room thought a phone rang. I was the only one standing there who knew it was an arrival. My father did not pick it up. My father put his hand on it, face down, and left his hand there. Then my mother said, You've ruined this family. And I said the only sentence I had prepared, the one I'd said out loud to an empty apartment at 3 a.m. I said, I signed exactly what you told me to sign. Nobody said anything for a while. And then Nora, who had a fabric sample in her back pocket and had measured the front window with a tape measure, said the only intelligent thing anyone in my family has said in 9 years. She looked at my father and she said, Who's paying the tax on it? Because she'd gotten there. In about 90 seconds, standing in a living room in a dress, with a beer soaking into the carpet, a dental hygienist got to the only question that matters, and it is the same question the entire room had walked past. And my father didn't answer that either. I'll tell you what happened Friday in a minute. But before I do, one thing. For 9 years, I thought I was being taken advantage of. That's what I called it in my head. Taken advantage of. It's a soft phrase. It lets you stay. I was wrong. Taking advantage of somebody means you noticed them and made a choice. I wasn't being noticed. I was a line item. And the day I stopped asking my family to see me and started reading what they'd written down instead was the first day I had any power at all, and it cost me a $9 receipt and 4 phone calls. Your family will tell you what you mean to them. They'll tell you in a toast, with feeling, in a nice shirt. Read the dates instead. Friday, June 26th. The chain was supposed to record at 9 in the morning. It didn't. I know exactly what happened because Pam told me in the flat, pleasant, absolutely uninterested voice of a professional reading a field off a screen. She called me at 10:15. She said, "I'm calling to confirm we've put the file on hold. The underwriter won't insure over an owner's objection. We've notified the buyer." I said, "What does the buyer do?" She said, "Hun, they've already terminated. They terminated at 9:40. 90 seconds is a beautiful plan. It just requires everybody to sign at the same time." Cardinal Ridge Holdings, LLC did not sue me. I'm not a party to anything. They sued my father, breach, on the purchase agreement he signed on May 11th, and a demand for their costs, which included an inspection on May 26th, a roof scope, a sewer scope, and $3,100 of legal fees to a firm that was also their own registered agent, which I think about sometimes and enjoy. My lawyer filed for partition on July 10th. Partition is the least dramatic remedy in American law. It just says, two people own a thing, one of them wants out, the court sells it and splits it. There's no villain in a partition. You don't even have to say why. My father's lawyer called mine on the 13th. They agreed to list it. The sign went in the yard this morning. $698,000. There are photographs of my mother's kitchen on the internet, which is the exact thing my father spent $88,000 to prevent, and in the end, he spent it for nothing, which is not irony, it's just arithmetic. When it closes, I get 50%. I'm not chasing the $153,000. I could. My lawyer says contribution claims between co-tenants are real, and I'd probably get a piece of it, and it would take 2 years and $12,000, and I would have to be in a room with my mother. I'm taking the half and going. Trevor gets nothing. He never owned it for 90 seconds, so there's no gain, so there's no tax, which means the only thing my brother came out of this with is the $5,000 he already spent and the 2 judgments he had in February. He is exactly where he was, which is more than my father intended for him. I did that. He doesn't know I did that, and he isn't going to. My parents are renting a 2-bedroom in Chandler, Arizona. There's a pool. My mother has told my Aunt Verna that they downsized on purpose. Nora called me once, 2 weeks ago. She didn't apologize. I think you're expecting one, and I've thought about this a lot. She had nothing to apologize for. She measured a window in a house she was told was hers. That's not a crime. That's what believing looks like from the outside. She called and there was a pause, and then she said, "Clara, what's the escrow number?" And I understood exactly what she was asking, and that she was standing in a kitchen with her back to a doorway, and that she was going to go look at the same free county website I looked at and read the same 11 pages and find out on her own what her husband had signed at 12:44 on a Sunday for $5,000 while she was making a salad. I said, 62-4108, Harbor Line on Fremont. Ask for Pam. Tell her you're on the deed of trust for your own house, and you want to know if there's a lien coming. She said, okay. I said, Nora, get your own lawyer, not a family one. And she said, okay, again, in a voice I recognized, because it was the voice I had on a Sunday in a parking lot behind a closed tire shop. Then I hung up, and I sat in my apartment with the radiator clanking, and I changed my number. Not because I hate them. I keep waiting for that, and it hasn't come. I changed it because for 9 years my family had a phone number that connected directly to $1,418 a month, and no matter what anybody in that house says at any dinner for the rest of their lives, that's what the number was for. Not me. The transfer. My father told me I was alone. He was right. He just thought he was insulting me. He didn't know he was reading me my terms.